December 11, 1990, New York City. Outside the Ravenite Social Club, FBI agents waited in silence. Inside, a man who had defied every law and headline stepped out in a $1,000 coat, straight into handcuffs. They called him the Teflon Don, because nothing ever stuck. But this time, the stain wouldn't wash off. This is the true story of John Gotti, the mob boss who ruled with flash, fear, and front-page swagger. You're watching episode 22, part of Mob Truth, where the real stories of the underworld come to life. Subscribe now and join the family. We drop new episodes daily. Let's begin. He wasn't born into power. He took it. John Gotti grew up in the slums of East New York, Brooklyn, one of 13 children crammed into poverty. His father was a laborer who barely kept food on the table. But little Johnny wasn't built for paychecks or pity. By age 12, he was already stealing cars. By 16, he was running with gangs. His idol? Albert Anastasia, the Mad Hatter of Murder, Inc. Gotti studied the way real bosses moved: suits, silence, and violence. But while most street kids fell into the system, Gotti climbed it. He joined the Fulton Rockaway Boys, a crew working under the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, the social front for the Gambino family's most ruthless crew in Ozone Park. They called him Crazy Horse back then, not because he was wild, but because he charged at problems like a bull. And people noticed. By his early 20s, Gotti wasn't just another street punk. He was made for this life, and he was about to prove it. The Hijack King. By the early 1970s, Gotti had made his name stealing cargo from JFK Airport. While other crews were boosting TVs and cigarettes, Gotti's crew was intercepting whole truckloads of merchandise: electronics, clothing, cash. He ran it like clockwork. No mess, no bodies, just profit. The Gambino family noticed. Gotti was placed under Agnello Della Croce, the feared underboss with a deep loyalty to old-school rules. Della Croce became a mentor, and Gotti, his prized student. But Gotti's path wasn't clean. In 1973, he was ordered to whack James McBratney, a thug who had kidnapped a Gambino associate. The hit was messy. It happened in public, in a Staten Island bar, and Gotti got arrested. But he kept his mouth shut. No names, no tears, just prison time. When he got out, the Gambinos saw him as stand-up, and Gotti, he saw prison as a promotion. The rise through blood. In 1980, tragedy struck. Gotti's 12-year-old son, Frank, was run over and killed by a neighbor, John Favara. The man vanished soon after. Some say he was beaten with a bat, stuffed in a barrel, and dissolved. Others say he simply disappeared into the wind. But no one doubted who was behind it. Even in grief, Gotti made a statement. "You don't touch a Don's family." By now, Gotti was a captain in the Gambino family. He ran his crew from the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, dressing sharp, talking fast, and commanding respect. But one thing burned inside him. He hated the boss, Paul Castellano. Castellano was a businessman, not a street guy. He skipped Della Croce's funeral. He pushed drug bans. To Gotti, Castellano was weak, and he wasn't fit to wear the crown. The hit heard round the underworld December 16, 1985, Manhattan. Outside Sparks Steakhouse, Paul Castellano and his bodyguard pulled up for dinner. They never made it to the door. In seconds, bullets ripped through their suits. Gotti's team had executed the hit perfectly. No arrests, no suspects. Just blood on the pavement and a message in the air. There's a new boss now. John Gotti had just pulled off the most public Mafia coup in modern history and walked away untouched. That night, he circled the block in a car, watching the aftermath like a man watching his kingdom take shape. From that moment on, John Gotti wasn't just a boss, he was a celebrity. The Celebrity Don. After the Castellano hit, Gotti took over the Gambino family, the most powerful crime family in America. But unlike bosses before him, Gotti didn't hide. He wore $2,000 Brioni suits, strutted down Mulberry Street, and held court outside the Ravenite Social Club like a movie star. The press called him the Dapper Don, always smiling, always in the paper. And when the feds tried to nail him, he walked, 3 high-profile trials, 3 acquittals. The media gave him a new name, the Teflon Don. Crowds cheered for him like a rock star outside the courthouse. But behind the shine, his enemies were stacking up. Old-school bosses hated the spotlight. Law enforcement hated being made fools. And the FBI, they were watching quietly, the eyes inside. What Gotti didn't know was this: the Ravenite Club was bugged. The FBI had placed a listening device in an upstairs apartment and inside the club itself. They captured meetings, orders, even jokes about murder. But the real twist came from inside his own circle. Sammy the Bull Gravano, Gotti's underboss and most trusted ally, began to fear he'd be sacrificed. In recorded tapes, Gotti blamed Sammy for most of the family's hits. That betrayal cut deep. In 1991, Sammy flipped, the highest-ranking mafioso ever to become a government witness. He testified against Gotti in a packed courtroom, and this time, nothing bounced off. The Teflon was gone, and Gotti, he was going away for life. The downfall. In 1992, after years of defying the system, John Gotti was convicted of murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and more. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The courtroom was packed. Reporters scribbled every word. Outside, the crowds were silent. The show was over. They sent him to USP Marion, one of the toughest federal prisons in America, locked down 23 hours a day. But even behind bars, Gotti refused to bow. He kept wearing Italian shoes, combed his hair, and issued orders through his son, Junior Gotti. He still saw himself as the boss. But outside, the Gambino family was crumbling, and the FBI had already moved on to the next mobster. Death of a Don. By the late 90s, prison had taken its toll. Gotti developed throat cancer, and the swagger began to fade. In 2002, after 10 years behind bars, he died in a prison hospital in Missouri, alone, shackled, and far from the flashing cameras he once loved. At his funeral in Queens, there were no crowds, no headlines, no red carpet, only silence. John Gotti had risen higher than almost any boss before him and fallen just as hard. He left behind a legacy of power, pride, betrayal, and a lesson the mob never forgot. The spotlight can make you a king, but it also makes it easier to shoot you. Junior and the Ghost of Gotti. After his father's arrest, John Jr. Gotti tried to hold the Gambino name together. He acted as boss for a few years, but the pressure was too much. Multiple indictments, betrayals, and street politics made it clear he wasn't his father. Junior eventually walked away, claiming he left the life behind. But the name Gotti still echoed in courtrooms, tabloids, and movies. To the public, John Gotti wasn't just a mobster. He became a symbol of the old-school mafia, when bosses were untouchable, cocky, and carried themselves like kings. But those days, they died with him. The final image. There's a photo taken during one of Gotti's trials. He's stepping out of a black car in a camel haircoat with a smirk on his face. That one image summed him up: defiant, stylish, dangerous. But what the photo doesn't show is the cost. Dozens dead, hundreds arrested, a family empire shattered. Gotti lived like a movie character. But this wasn't a film. This was real life. And real life always gets the last word. Behind the smile. To the public, John Gotti looked bulletproof, always grinning, always composed. But inside, he was under pressure. He didn't trust easily. He wiretapped his own men. He had to navigate not only law enforcement, but internal betrayal, paranoia, and power struggles. Every handshake could be a setup. Every word in the Ravenite could be used against him. The FBI tapes revealed Gotti wasn't just a charismatic leader. He was also controlling, sharp-tongued, and always calculating. He ruled with charm, but also fear. He'd joke with you one day and order your burial the next. The Teflon cracks. The turning point wasn't the trials, it was the tapes. Gotti never imagined his own voice would be his downfall. Recordings played in court revealed everything. Hits discussed casually, orders to silence people, insults thrown at his own underbosses. The jury didn't need much else. For a man who ruled by reputation, words became the weapon that finally ended him. It wasn't a bullet that brought down John Gotti. It was his own voice, played back in a courtroom filled with silence. The downfall. In 1992, after years of defying the system, John Gotti was convicted of murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and more. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The courtroom was packed. Reporters scribbled every word. Outside, the crowds were silent. The show was over. They sent him to USP Marion, one of the toughest federal prisons in America, locked down 23 hours a day. But even behind bars, Gotti refused to bow. He kept wearing Italian shoes, combed his hair, and issued orders through his son, Junior Gotti. He still saw himself as the boss. But outside, the Gambino family was crumbling, and the FBI had already moved on to the next mobster. Death of a Don. By the late 90s, prison had taken its toll. Gotti developed throat cancer, and the swagger began to fade. In 2002, after 10 years behind bars, he died in a prison hospital in Missouri, alone, shackled, and far from the flashing cameras he once loved. At his funeral in Queens, there were no crowds, no headlines, no red carpet, only silence. John Gotti had risen higher than almost any boss before him, and fallen just as hard. He left behind a legacy of power, pride, betrayal, and a lesson the mob never forgot. The spotlight can make you a king, but it also makes it easier to shoot you. The empire crumbles after Gotti's conviction. Sammy the Bull disappeared into witness protection, and the dominoes started falling fast. His testimony didn't just destroy Gotti, it exposed the entire structure of the Gambino family. Dozens were arrested. Captains flipped. Soldiers vanished. Federal indictments spread across New York like wildfire. The feared and once feared Gambinos were now fractured. Some wanted to stay loyal to Gotti. Others wanted to move on, rebuild, and survive. And for the first time in decades, the streets of New York felt like the mob had lost its grip. The name Gotti had brought them to the top, and now it dragged them down. The boss in a cage. At USP Marion, one of America's harshest federal prisons, John Gotti sat in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day. No suits, no limos, just concrete, steel, and silence. But he didn't stop being the boss. He used coded messages passed through his lawyer to issue orders, threaten enemies, and even influence who would lead the family next. One of those messages, intercepted by the feds, read simply, "There's still only one boss." But time was wearing him down. His health was fading. His influence slipping. The last message. In his final years, John Gotti refused to fade quietly. Even as throat cancer devoured his health, he stayed proud. He refused chemotherapy for a while, refused weakness. Visitors described him as thin, pale, but still trying to hold eye contact like a boss. Even his prison guards said, he didn't act like an inmate. He still acted like he ran something. His final letters were cryptic, hints about betrayal, regrets he never said aloud. One phrase he scribbled to a friend, "I did it my way, maybe too loud." The Forgotten Funeral, June 10th, 2002, Queens, New York. The funeral procession rolled through Howard Beach. But this wasn't the Gotti of the old days. No cheering crowds, no flashy send-off, no gangland parade. Law enforcement blocked roads. Drones hovered above. Only a few dozen loyalists stood by. For a man who once made jurors tremble and headlines explode, John Gotti was buried in silence. He was laid to rest next to his son Frankie. Same graveyard, same family plot. The Don who once ruled New York. Now just another name carved in stone. A name that never dies years later. The name Gotti still echoes in documentaries, rap lyrics, courtroom dramas, and the streets of Ozone Park. To some, he was a criminal. To others, a legend. To law enforcement, a symbol of their biggest win. To the underworld, a warning. No mob boss after him ever dared to be that public again. His downfall reminded them all. The camera flashes don't come for free. Every spotlight casts a shadow. The spotlight strategy. Most bosses feared cameras. Gotti invited them. He walked out of court like it was a runway, smiling, winking, telling reporters, "They'll never get me." It wasn't arrogance. It was calculated psychological warfare. He wanted the jury to see him as a man, not a monster, to create doubt, to make the government look weak. And for a while, it worked. His trials weren't just legal battles, they were PR campaigns. But that strategy had a cost. The constant exposure made the FBI go all in. Wiretaps, informants, even planting bugs in his lawyer's office. No other boss in modern history had that level of surveillance. He played the press. But the feds learned how to play him back. The Gotti blueprint. Years after Gotti's death, investigators admitted something shocking. We weren't just chasing a gangster. We were chasing an icon. He changed how law enforcement approached organized crime. No more waiting for confessions. They built entire task forces just for him. They studied his wardrobe, his routines, his weaknesses. Gotti made them evolve. And for the Mafia, he became a blueprint of what not to do. Every boss after him kept a low profile, avoided press, moved carefully. But Gotti, he left a legacy that couldn't be copied because he wasn't trying to survive. He wanted to be remembered. The fear behind the smile, people who met Gotti up close all said the same thing. He had a smile on his face, but you still felt like you might not make it home. It wasn't just the suit or the slicked back hair. It was his eyes, cold, unblinking. He'd be laughing 1 second and dead silent the next. He never needed to raise his voice. He made people feel small without saying much at all. A waiter once spilled wine on his coat. Gotti just looked at him, smiled politely and said, "It's all right. You're not the first guy who's made a mess in front of me. Just be glad it was wine, not blood." The guy quit the job the next day. The dangerous charm. That was Gotti's real weapon. Not guns, not soldiers. Charisma. He could charm politicians, reporters, even rivals. He once convinced a federal agent to drop a surveillance case just by talking to him in the street. His charisma didn't make him less dangerous. It made him more dangerous. He was a man who could order your murder, and you'd still feel like he gave you a chance. That was the genius of Gotti, and the tragedy, because eventually the world stopped being impressed. The jury stopped being swayed, and the charm, it wore off. Even legends run out of time. When legends collide, John Gotti didn't rise in a vacuum. He came up in a world run by men like Carlo Gambino, the boss before him, the master of quiet control. Agnello Della Croce, Gotti's mentor, feared underboss who believed in old-school rules. Paul Castellano, the man Gotti betrayed and had gunned down. Sammy, the bull. Gravano, his underboss turned government witness. Vincent, the chin gigante, the rival boss who pretended to be insane to avoid prosecution. Gotti called him a clown. Gotti outlasted some, destroyed others, but in the end, he joined the same fate as all of them. A file in the FBI archives, a headline from a past decade, another ghost in the history of American crime, the final lesson. Gotti's life became a template, studied in FBI training videos, turned into documentaries, even played by John Travolta in a Hollywood film. But no actor could truly play Gotti, because what made him dangerous wasn't just the crimes. It was the fact that he made evil look attractive. He was what every young wannabe gangster wanted to be, until they saw where it ended, locked in a cage, dying in silence, buried without a crown. John Gotti lived like a king, but in the end, he proved there's no happy ending in this life. The man behind the myth, years after his death, people still argue, was John Gotti a monster or a misunderstood icon? To his enemies, he was a criminal, plain and simple. To his crew, he was a leader, sharp, decisive, loyal if you earned it. To his family, he was just dad. His daughter once said, "They only knew the headlines. I knew the man who came home, laughed with us, protected us." But that's the contradiction of Gotti. He wasn't just one thing. He was a boss, a father, a murderer, a myth. And like every myth, he was doomed to fall. You've been watching Mob Truth, Episode 22, the story of John Gotti, the boss who flew too close to the spotlight. If you made it this far, you're already part of the family. So don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment, and welcome the new soldiers in the comments. We've got more true Mafia stories coming every week. No fiction, no filters, just the real underworld. Thanks for watching, and don't forget who really runs the streets.